everyone. Welcome to Queer Lawyers Speak, hosted by LAGBAC, Chicago's LGBTQ plus bar association. My name is Adam Zebelian. I'm a partner at Schiller DeCanto and Fleck, where I practice family law. And I'm also the president of LAGBAC, Chicago's LGBTQ plus bar association. Today, we're talking about being out and proud in big law. And our two guests today are Jeremy Gray, a former LAGBAC board member and current LAGBAC Foundation board member. And to his left is Michael Sokolowski, a current board member with LAGBAC. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Adam.
So why don't we start with you, Michael. Introduce yourself to the audience. Tell them what you do for a living and where you came from and just general introductions.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. Well, my name is Michael Sokolowski. I am an employment attorney at the law firm Michael Best and Friedrich here in Chicago. Michael Best and Friedrich is a full-service firm with 18 offices across the country. I did not start my career at the firm. I've been there for the last 5 years, but I've been practicing for about 10 years. Initially started out actually working for a company in Missouri before shifting over to private practice and eventually landing at Michael Best. I am a Midwest native, but not a Chicago native. Grew up in Michigan before moving here to Chicago after law school.
You went to Michigan, right?
I did, yes.
Okay. I think you were the first Michigan grad that we've had on the show. We've had fellow Michigan State people like me, but no Michigan people, so I won't make any jokes. All right, Jeremy.
Well,
can you introduce yourself?
I will introduce myself, and thank you again for LAGBAC for having all of us here today. My name is Jeremy Gray. I'm the Assistant General Counsel for Litigation for Circle, which is an innovative fintech company that's based out of Boston. At Circle, I head up global litigation, so I oversee all of our litigation from soup to nuts around the world. Prior to working at Circle, which I joined 3 years ago, I was a partner at Jones Day, which is a major international law firm with offices all around the world. I was with Jones Day for about 14 years. And there I specialized in antitrust and general commercial litigation. And prior to that, for a brief amount of moment, I was at another law firm here in Chicago, which no longer exists. It's been absorbed by somebody else. But I spent kind of the reverse of Michael's career. I started out in the law firm setting and have now moved into a company.
Very good. So, Jeremy, let's stick with you. What is big law?
Big law. The phrase is a difficult one to define. I mean, really, what we're talking about big law or large law firms, we're really talking about law firms that have multiple offices across, various different, either United States or really internationally. And I think at that point, when you're talking about a group of lawyers, when you're hitting thousands of lawyers, I think that's a pretty good definition of like whenever you're sitting the echelons of bigger law. Although it's not something that's a definite definition. I mean, there could be you could have very complex, very like law firms with multiple different offices that maybe don't hit 1,000 lawyers. So it's not like a definition we can actually say one thing, but it's usually a sophisticated firm with multiple practice areas that span really all of a client's needs.
Yeah.
Michael, where did you start your career again?
So I started working at a company down in Missouri, not even doing employment work, but that was kind of, that was always what I wanted to do. And so, I eventually decided to kind of make the switch, make that jump over to private practice. And I started sort of the opposite of big law when I did make that jump, working for a boutique employment law firm, doing management side employment work. And like I said, eventually, kind of moved on over to Michael Best, where I've been, ever since.
And Michael Best is a multinational firm.
We've got 18 offices across the country. So but again, full service firm where, we can really kind of handle all of the client's needs from employment, finance, venture work, litigation,
international
everything.
Tax issues.
Right.
Okay. So you went from corporate America, small boutique firm, to then big law.
Right.
All right. What was the transition like from corporate America? Have you been out your entire career?
Well, so I actually have not.
Okay.
Being, I think, out professionally was sort of the last train stop for me, if so to speak. I came out throughout the course of, most of my, 20s, to various, groups of people over time. And professionally, that was really kind of the last stop. And so, when I started my career out of law school, I was not professionally out. And at the time, being 25 years old right out of law school, right, I wanted to be known, for the work I did. I was afraid of being known as the gay lawyer, right, or sort of the gay employee. So that kind of, factored into my decision making at the time. I think in hindsight, I wish it would have been different. I think that being out professionally, out in big law, has been, really a great experience for me. A lot of, ways that I've been able to, I think, leverage that professionally, gain a network of folks, find mentors and advisors, and a support network, outside the office that, I didn't always necessarily have.
Through LAGBAC, or even, I'm sure, Michael Best has an affinity group.
We do, yeah. And so, now it's kind of come, full circle in a way. I started out, practicing, very much, kind of, being just a version of myself. And, now I am, co-chair of our firm's LGBTQ plus employee resource group. And also sit on
Which
our
I
DEI
termed affinity group,
Yeah.
a resource group. It's an LGBTQ plus professional group within your firm.
Exactly.
When did you graduate law school then?
2013.
2013. Okay. But times are different in 2013.
I think so. I mean, even within the last, 11 years, same-sex marriage wasn't even legal when I started practicing. So I think that things have changed pretty significantly even within that amount of time.
Definitely. So, Jeremy, when did you graduate from law school?
I graduated a little bit earlier. So I actually graduated in 2006. So I've been practicing now for 18 years.
You're almost at the 20-year mark.
I'm almost at the 20-year mark.
So I don't want to talk with you as if you're the elder statesman on the panel, but you are the most experienced and have been practicing the longest, including me. So what kind of changes have you seen? Because you've been in the law firm setting most of your career up until 3 years ago. So what kind of transitions have you seen in that space?
Well, I will say, it's okay to call me old. I'm getting up.
You don't look old.
I appreciate that. No, I think, we're talking a little bit about like what the progression of time was. And I still remember when I was entering law school, the Supreme Court hadn't decided Lawrence v. Texas yet, which was, for me, that was like the first year I was in law school. And that was a really pivotal moment. It was the first time where we had seen, up until that point, the Supreme Court had said, oh, well, we could have, laws that really do target particularly gay men on the books, and they're enforceable. So seeing that occur, my first year of law school, and it was actually a noticeable shift in what occurred afterwards. And suddenly, I think you started seeing more acceptance, but doesn't mean that it was actually okay to be professionally out at the time. I mean, it was actually a big question you had to ask yourself, like, what do you want to do? Particularly whenever, the practice I wanted to do was mostly going to be concentrated in the larger, multinational or big law firms. So I had to ask myself that question, do I become out professionally immediately upon going in there? And, I thought about it a lot. And I took a different tactic. I was like, okay, I'm going to be unabashedly out, but I'm not, I did it in calculated ways. For example, saying, I'm going to bring my, the person I was dating at the time, I'll bring them to events. If everybody else is going to bring, somebody, I'm going to bring somebody too. And I did it in many ways kind of a stealth way. I'm not really, making a big issue of it. But
this is just who I am.
This is just who I am. And just, you guys, this is just what it is. I want you to look at me professionally, but you're going to see me in social situations where this will occur. And initially, because I graduated in 2006 and I started working here in Chicago at a hyper-regional firm here in Chicago. And it was old school. But fortunately, there were other out gay members of the law firm, including one who was the then president of LAGBAC. And, it gave me a little bit of more berth, I think, to be able to be out professionally. But even then, I stayed at that firm for a couple of years, and I went to, this major international law firm, and, major, large institutions like that are very conservative just by the nature of who they are. Decision-making and, economically, they're very conservative. And so I had to ask myself the question, again, like how do I do it in this new environment that's a much larger place where I didn't know anybody. I didn't know if there were other queer lawyers that existed there. But I fortunately came in and I made another decision. I was like, you know what, worked for me the first time, just do it again. And it was a confluence of a lot of different things that happened at the time. So I was asked to join the global diversity committee pretty early on as an attorney at this law firm.
At Jones Day.
At Jones Day. And I was asked to join it. And I was like, oh, this is great. And I was one of the first, like, queer lawyers was on the committee because a lot of people were still kind of, antsy about whether they push forward on this. But on that committee, what I saw is like things changed over time, and you could see the development of things over time. And then eventually, we developed a global LGBTQ plus affinity group, which I chaired for, I think, 5 or 6 years before I stepped down. And but it was interesting to see kind of that arc of time and things changing, because originally the way that the firm had structured its diversity was like there was one diversity committee for everything. And then it was like, no, maybe we do need affinity groups. And then when we did the affinity groups, it was like, oh, wait, we can actually have one for LGBTQ plus attorneys. And that group grew from, a smattering in individual offices to eventually having hundreds of people, from queer lawyers to also allies, really coming together and doing great things. And I think you started seeing that shift, particularly when you saw Obergefell getting decided. Like that
Which was
another
2015.
Thing. 2015. But like you saw like these progressions where things were like, oh, okay, acceptable. So I would say, a long way of saying, I was out, but out on my own terms.
Okay, and you've been practicing in Chicago then?
Yes,
almost your entire career.
I always sat in Chicago, although my practice usually was global because of what I did.
All right. Yeah, that's interesting. I myself came out in law school, but then I also, like you said, had to make another, and you said that as well, make another decision whether I'll be out immediately in my career. I knew I'd be out, but it was when. Was it when I was a law clerk? Was it when I was a young lawyer? When I was an associate? Like, at what point? When I initially, my 1L year, when I went back to Michigan, my bosses were amazing. I could have totally been out, but I was still scared to be out. But then I was recruited at the National LGBTQ plus Bar Association's conference to come work in Chicago. So there was no way I could not be out. I was that candidate, which was the best thing for me, because then I didn't have a choice. I was out after my second year of law school, and I had no choice but to stay out at that point.
Well, you bring up Lavender Law, and I think Lavender Law is a really good example.
And Lavender Law is the conference that the National Bar puts on. Yeah.
And you talk about being recruited there, and I remember in law school going to Lavender Law, and it was
in 2007.
In 2007, and actually no, I was there in 2003 or 4. I remember going to my first Lavender Law, and it was in Minneapolis. And at that time, the entire recruiting thing happened in a very, very tiny conference room. I mean, they had like a circle of tables. And that was it. I mean, and I think the good example of what that is today, like now, the Lavender Law sells out, but it's also, they take up an entire ballroom, no matter where they go, just because I think you're seeing
of recruiters,
legal
in big firms.
I mean, I attended last year. I mean, it's
is your firm recruiting this year? Or are you?
We are, yeah. I mean, it's just so different, I think, and changed a lot over the years. The amount of representation, and that's reflective of that.
And like the larger law firms are putting resources behind actually recruiting at these events. It's actually become really difficult to recruit at the events because there's just so much. Like there's so many different entities that are there. Whereas when I remember in 2004, or 2005, when I was looking for a job and I went to the recruit there, I talked to 15 law firms because there were 15 law firms there.
Right. I mean, and now there's like 300.
Yeah, now there's 300. I mean, but I think that's another example of how much things have changed. Particularly because usually the Lavender Law is the larger firms because they have the resources to send people. They can create the little the backdrops for all of them and give away the swag that they want to. But I think that's an example of like firms putting their money like to actually actively recruit individuals from historically disadvantaged backgrounds.
So, Michael, I'm going to ask you a personal question.
Okay.
If you could do it all over again, would you have changed anything as an out queer individual now? when you graduated from law school?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I would have come out professionally sooner. I think that,
But of course, hindsight is 2020. The times were different, but
it was a little different, but there were, I think personal things that, were impacting that. But, that is something that I would have done different, because I think being your authentic self, both personally and professionally, I think increases most folks' satisfaction, with the job. And I've been fortunate to work at a place where there are, so many incredibly supportive colleagues. I got married at the end of last year, and there were a number of colleagues, from my firm who attended our wedding. We had an entire table of, just for the firm, at the reception, and so, that's not something that I would have been able to have, had I not been out. But knowing that there are people that you work with that support you, and see you as, a valued individual and a valued team member, I think is, means a lot.
When you told me how long you were going on your honeymoon for, I thought, wow, you do have a supportive firm. 2-week honeymoon in big law. I didn't know that existed. But so, same question to you. Would you change anything? Again, you graduated a little bit different time. I graduated in 2009.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I would say I would do something differently. I think there's situations that now, with hindsight, I would have handled differently. Because I want to say, being how I came out, people knowing, that I was a gay attorney wasn't a big issue for people I worked with in other places. But there were still challenges. I mean, we're talking. Sometimes I was a litigator, so I would go meet clients and we would have dinners after trials, and I remember being placed into very uncomfortable situations with people who I knew professionally, as in they were my client, and we'd be having dinner and they'd look over me and be like, "So, you have a wife? You have children?" And learning how to navigate those questions, particularly at different times of my career. I mean, I distinctly remember a dinner at Joe's Stone Crab here in Chicago with a client of ours, and he asked the question, and I froze, and because I was like, "How do I respond to this question?"
Right.
And will it be okay for that client? So I would say there's nothing that necessarily made it easier or less easy or more simple. But at the end of the day, I look back at those situations and wish I was me today. Because I know exactly how I'd handle it today, but then I was, still.
Well, you also weren't a partner probably at the time.
I was not a partner.
And you were climbing the ladder, and how would you have handled that if they weren't okay with it? Then what?
Yeah, and those are the challenges I think that we came across, that I came across in my career, which so I could be okay at work in my little nice setting in my office that I never got to leave. But when I had to go out into the professional world of clients, et cetera, I think that became a little bit more challenging for me.
And as a divorce lawyer, it's a very personal area of the law, probably the most personal area of the law you can practice in, other than maybe criminal law, but I still would say family law is more personal just because you have such a unique relationship with your clients. I struggle with it today. I not struggle with it, but I tend to steer away from any conversation about anything I'm doing with my clients. It's all about them. But the conversations do come up, and I do have conservative clients. I will represent anyone. That's my job as a lawyer, right? I've never had a negative reaction, though. No matter if they're conservative, liberal, super religious, not religious at all, it has not made a difference. But I recognize that we live in Chicago.
Yeah.
I recognize,
a little bit of a bubble.
Yes, yeah. I recognize the population that exists here and in the greater Chicago area, and we're lucky in that sense. But in other parts of the country, we're not so lucky.
Well, I think it's interesting when you bring up the personal part of it. While a lot of what we do is quote unquote impersonal because we're working for a company, we still have relationships within the companies. Our relationships we develop with the as the role I play today, it's I develop roles with my counsel, and you do want to be able to have a functioning relationship with them. And you would hope, particularly for counsel, you're going to see a lot, that you can have something that's a little bit more than surface level of, I need you to do this work, please get the work back to me. You want to be able to develop a long-standing relationship for people you trust.
Business relationships.
Yeah, business, but business that become, a little bit more, like, so you can have dinner with them and you can have more conversation with them. So you do still have that kind of thoughts, I think, sometimes, but...
And I think being out facilitates that in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Now, I will say no one has ever assumed that I have a wife.
Me neither. Jeremy, maybe you more than maybe us, but
I think exactly zero folks were surprised when I came out, but...
yeah, we came out as soon as we popped out, But so do you have any advice to younger lawyers or law students? Because people are still in the closet, and hopefully people that are watching the show, maybe because it's on YouTube as well, maybe there's law students or lawyers in other parts of the country that's not Chicago, that doesn't have the benefit of our bubble. What advice would you give to them?
We both do the same thing. What would you tell them? I think a person, if you're going to be a lawyer, it's like one of the things I always tell young lawyers, it's like, you're no longer a child. Like, you're now an adult and you're in charge of your own career. And I think you have to really evaluate, like, what do I want out of it? And once you kind of say that, like, then you have to figure out, like, where does my personal life fit within that? And you can make a decision as to which way you want to go. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be an out attorney. I'm not saying somebody needs to, not be out. I think it's a personal decision for the individual, but you have to approach it with some maturity of, like, I'm a professional, and how do I want to handle this situation? Like, how do I want to do it? And do it on your terms. Mm-hmm. And I think if you own it on your terms, then you'll be much happier with it. It's putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, I think, where you're like hiding it, or like you feel like you have to hide it. If you feel like you have to hide it, then probably you shouldn't be hiding it. But if you feel like you don't want that to be part of your professional persona, then if you don't want to be out like that, that's fine. The other thing I would say to everybody, though, become an ally to yourself and other attorneys, because you never know who may need your help. Even if you don't want it to be part of your big persona that you're gay, like, if people know you are, be supportive and really help lift everybody else up. Like, one of my big things, the reason I was on the board originally, the reason I'm on the foundation now, is like, I believe that we should all put ladders down behind us to make sure everybody can still achieve what they want to achieve. And the good things that happened before I became a lawyer, I want to make sure other people have that opportunity too.
And that's a great point, that no one should feel pressured to come out. It's totally on your terms. And if you never want to do it, that's okay. If you want to do it tomorrow, that's okay too. There's support here through LAGBAC.
Yeah. And, I would say, I think kind of related to that point, as folks are evaluating whether they want to be professionally out or not, and to what extent, the best career advice that I've ever gotten, and that I continue to give other people, is don't let your career happen to you. And so I think it's important for people to kind of really be deliberate in that choice and think about, what can my career be, if I'm out, or what can my career be if I'm not out, right? And sort of, make a strategic and a deliberate decision, for yourself, to kind of advance, whatever goals that you have for yourself.
There was a point you made that I 100% agree with, that when you're not out, though, people sense that you're not out. And it interferes with your ability, I think, to connect with people fully. Either that be your client or your colleagues or opposing counsel. So I thought that was a good point, because people can sense you're holding something back, and that can hinder you in your career.
Absolutely.
So we have some time left. Does either one of you want to share your coming out story? I know we talked about professional coming out stories, but...
I think my coming out story was really quite bland.
Okay, let's hear it.
I think literally that whenever I finally came out, it was probably an undergrad with a whole group of friends, and there was maybe some libations occurring.
Okay.
And somebody was asked me, "Am I gay?" And I was like, "I am." And that was
Really?
Was it. And that's how it all happened.
Where'd you go to undergrad?
Little liberal arts school in Missouri. So,
Okay.
But it was a small town. It was a very odd thing. I was, in many ways, everybody's token for a while, which was great. I fortunately, I had a lot of very supportive people around me. But I was saying, it's kind of boring in many ways. So it was like, it just kind of happened one night, and that was it.
Okay?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for me, I first came out to folks when I was in college. Very close friends, that I really trusted. And, it wasn't sort of like all at once, like I mentioned earlier. It was kind of this slow progression of different groups of people and different individuals as I became more comfortable with myself and more comfortable telling people until really kind of the entire dam just burst. And I decided, what, this is not enjoyable, right? To live, sort of as two different people, depending on what group of people you're interacting with. And it's really hard to maintain that for, there's a lot of people out there who do maintain that for decades and decades. For me, it got to a point where I didn't want to live that way anymore.
Very good. Well, thank you both very much for coming on the show and talking with us and sharing some very personal information as well. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Thank you.